You've probably heard of the term storytelling, the way of conveying meaning through words, actions, or light, either in a book, video game, or movie. Without it, every piece of content we consume would be bland and void of any meaning. So, when characters in a movie speak, laugh, or shout at each other, there's something important being transmitted. But what if I told you this video game uses none of that? Instead, it uses three uniquely different techniques of storytelling that made it one of the best indie games I've ever played. This is how Gris tells its story. At first glance, Gris is a beautiful indie game filled with vibrant colors and gorgeous drawings interacting in a world deemed of a wild imagination. But below its surface lay some dark secrets that make this experience not as friendly as it may seem in the beginning. The game starts with this: a woman laying down on a weathered giant rock hand. And as she sings to the statue, her voice suddenly gives in and she loses the ability to sing, finally breaking the hand she was resting on, falling down into the unknown. The first thing you notice when entering this game is its visuals, the depiction of the color that paints this majestic world, and the first technique Gris uses to hint us onto its meaning. It may seem trivial at first, but color can give profound meaning to what you're trying to convey. It can make a character sad, a world alive, or a community evil. This is commonly known as color psychology, where a tone, saturation, and brightness of a color is associated with distinct human emotions. And without a word, without us knowing, it tells our subconscious how to feel about a certain action, character, or environment. And I want to focus on the latter one for now. In Gris, the sceneries go from empty white palaces all the way to dense green forests and deep blue oceans. These places are separated in chapters designated by finding one of these big hand statues, and with every hand you encounter, a color is added to the world and a new area is unlocked to explore. But to understand the color that defines each one of these levels, first we need to take a look at the absence of it. After falling from the broken hand, we land in an empty void. The only thing inside are small birds, rocks, and remains of what seems to be a civilization, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The dominant colors here are white and black. These two are a very interesting pair because of the contrast ratio. What is that, you may ask? Let me break it down. Contrast is simply how different one color is to another. For example, if we take a color wheel and pick a random shade, the more we get away from it, the more contrast there will be. This is a simple yet very effective way to create punchy visuals and cool-looking color palettes. But the pigment of the color is not the only way to create contrast. If we take the same pigment or hue and add more of it to itself, it becomes a more vibrant variation. And if we take away from it, it becomes a more dull pastel shade. This is called saturation, and is another way to create contrast. But what if we have no hue at all? What if the pigment is gone? That is what we're thrown into in Gris. A world without color. And in that case, we can give the colors more or less light to create the contrast between them. This is black and white, the two most opposite sides of a same coin, the maximum contrast one can create. Two colors that negate each other. And why is this so important in the first area of the game? You see, white can mean purity and peace, but it also can mean emptiness and desolation. And after having lost all color from her world, our protagonist feels empty, alone, in denial of the death of her world. This is no regular platformer. This is a game about grief, and is told to us in the first moments of gameplay, without any dialogue nor text, only through color. To continue the idea of representation through color psychology, the next thing you encounter as you play is a sandstorm. The first glimpse of color in this pale world is bright red and fills the screen with every gust of wind, whether the whole space turns red with deep crimson rocks and tinted skies. Red is the color of blood, an imminent meaning of danger and caution, but it's also the color of fire, a ruthless force of nature, uncontrollable, volatile, and hostile. And this brings meaning to the second phase of the game: anger, the next stage of grief. And I do want to talk more about this area in particular, but we will get to that in a little while. But what was clearly stated through color takes a sharp turn in the next level of her banter: bargaining. Green is the color of nature, trees, grass. It means life and hope. It's a very peaceful color associated with tranquility. But this doesn't make any sense. How come such a positive color defines this stage of grief? Ah, yes, the color of money. You may think that color psychology is strictly tied to primal instincts or nature's meaning through our ancestors, but it goes much deeper than that. Meanings come from culture, and money is one of the biggest cultural icons of humanity to this day. Life does give meaning to colors, but through time we gave meaning to that life. We live in a never-ending cycle of feeding meaning to each other as we grow and evolve. In this context, green is the color of negotiation, of hope to get a better outcome. It may seem like a peaceful and relaxing area, but as always, the meaning goes deeper than what you may see at the first glance. Coming out of the bargaining forest, we find ourselves deep into a flooded world, blue and dim. This may be the color of the sky or a peaceful lake with ducks swimming about, but in this case it's much more than that. Remember when I talked about the desaturation and brightness of colors? Well, the blues portrayed in this area are very saturated and dark. The hue of a color is not the only thing that gives it meaning. While green may mean life and nature, a change in saturation and brightness can turn it into sickness and infestation, completely turning its meaning upside down. And with blue, something similar happens. While a light and less saturated one could mean calmness, intelligence, and trust, such a dark and saturated color brings a much more somber tone, meaning sadness and hopelessness. Have you ever wondered why rainy nighty scenes are used so often during sad moments in films? This is why. But in Gris, it's not only a light rain that covers the screen and protagonist, the whole world submerges into colors sometimes so dark you can't see a way out. This is depression. Quite literally, the meaning of the phrase feeling blue refers to sadness, to desolation and loss of hope, all expressed by changing two values of the same color. Okay, you've been playing for a while now, and every time you reach the end of a level, you don't just change colors, you add them to the palette of the game, effectively getting back what you lost at the very beginning of a journey. And even if these previous colors are still there throughout the entire game, they are always overpowered by the new dominant emotion of the chapter. Until a huge yellow moon hovers behind the protagonist, painting the whole world, quite literally, under a new light. Yellow is the color of the sun, or at least our interpretation of it, is the color of light, a safe spot in the night, a place to call home. And yes, it also means joy and happiness, but I don't think that is the meaning of this exact shade in the game. It is less saturated, almost white at some point. It's not joy, but peace. It's a light at the end of a rough tunnel, an escape. But what's most interesting about this chapter's color is not its meaning, but how it's used. You see, yellow is not present on top of other colors, but alongside them, even in less quantity than others. It's not trying to fill a world without control, not trying to make less of any other color, any other emotion. It's bringing balance to them. You see now, it's not only what colors you use, but also the ratio of them in a composition, what makes it balance well. It's very common to find palettes with a main color supported by contrasting ones in smaller doses in the same composition. But this game goes most of its time in an almost monochrome palette, where each chapter's color dominated on top of the others. Yet in the end, the new color comes by and balances the ratio of them. This chapter is telling us it's not about ignoring and getting rid of those negative emotions and feelings, it's about learning to live with them in a healthy way. Because all of them, from anger to sadness, from denial to bargaining, they are part of us. And without going through them first, we wouldn't have a colorful landscape to look at once we get to the other side. Now that we know the meaning of the game and its colors, it is time to look at the world itself. What lays under those structures and landscapes that populate this story? What is the meaning behind the shapes of Gris? In the first area, we encounter two distinct shape languages. First is the curved line, present in trees and rocks. They feel soft, and they are not closed shapes. Unlike a circle or an oval, these are not complete. It's almost a circle, a representation of returning, going back. It is the Nile. But take a look at the direction of these lines. They go down, they go side to side, and even up. They represent a path without finish line. One that has no clear single direction. It is the loss of sense of direction. The other shape language we find here is the complete opposite, this series of straight lines in the structures of the landscape. Apart from being broken and weathered, the structures transmit uneasiness in another way. In photography, there is something called leading lines. These are imaginary lines that run across a picture to guide the eye through it. And in Gris, these leading lines are used too. But in this case, they lead nowhere clear. Some go up, sideways, or in weird diagonals. Leading lines are being used not to lead, but to show us we are lost. And this same recess is used all throughout the game until the last area where these lines finally make sense and follow distinct directions, creating stability and a clear path for our protagonist to follow. Entering the younger part of the game, shapes radically change. Instead of round soft lines or completely lost traits, we find ourselves immersed in a world of polygons. But if you look closely, they are still not following one same standard. They are erratic and filled with movement thanks to the straight lines and sharp corners. They are uninviting with their asymmetry, and they tell us about the bursts of rage that are to come with the wind. This is also where we start seeing these structures that don't seem to belong here. These serve as guiding spots and transitions in between parts of the game. They are unlike no other. They combine circles, triangles, squares, and other shapes. But what makes them feel like a safe place, like a steady structure, is their lines. All of these shapes create a very harmonic construction, and thus they make it feel stable and sturdy, all thanks to symmetry, leading lines, and distribution of the visual weight. Once we enter the forest, a new shape is introduced to us through the trees, a square. This shape now will dominate the whole stage, and for a good reason. Squares are very stable shapes. Imagine trying to push a diamond or an upside-down triangle. They fall pretty easily. But a square doesn't. That's why it's used to represent stable and imposing characters, but also characters that won't change their ideal, that are so immersed in their beliefs that won't budge or move to anyone nor anything. This brings meaning to the squares in the stage of bargaining. Not changing is the name of the game now, trying to keep what you had and negotiating to let go as little as possible. A square, not of stability, but of stubbornness. From the very start of this level, we see a lot of human-made structures. The very same ones we talked about earlier dominate this place with a very distinct shape, the semicircle. Not only is it present in the architecture, but also in the landscape. A circle is representative of a cycle, a never-ending loop of incompetence, self-destruction, and depression. And though it isn't the only shape we see in this world, is clearly the dominant one. It being remembered to us every once in a while makes us think we've escaped it, but in reality we are back at the beginning. But still, the most important composition attribute in this area is not a shape, but a negative space. In paintings or pictures, there are spaces that feel empty, that create a separate element without anything having to be in them. This is called negative space. Is a shape of nothing. And while it's more commonly used to balance a composition, Gris uses it in a very specific yet unsurprising way. It uses it to create the complete opposite effect. Once entering the underground, most of the screen is occupied by this obscure environment glooming over our character. These black parts of the landscape are negative space. They don't try to balance what we are seeing, but they try to make it hard to see. They create claustrophobic corridors and caves with sharp corners folding onto themselves. With stalactites and stalagmites coming in close to us, this negative space makes us feel the most trapped it can. It creates a maze of suffocation underwater, a dark cave where you no longer know where is up or down. This space is not sad. It's not just blue. This space is, for me, the perfect representation of depression. Because through its subtlety, it tells us what otherwise we would never understand. But once we get into the last part of the game, everything gets thrown out of the window and we see ourselves immersed in a more traditional architecture and beauty unlike any other part of this experience. Here, the arches and lines grow tall into the sky and create very stable and secure constructions. But the star of the show in this place is no other than the gravity changes throughout the stage. Now, we're not gonna dive into this mechanic, but the way it interacts with the world around it is just beautiful. This stage is really simple, because it follows more conventional rules of stage design. It looks more monotone and stale in its shapes and directions, but that's not bad. In fact, it is actually what makes us feel home again, what creates the feeling of approaching the end of this journey. You may think that I'm reading too much into this, and who knows, you may be right, but I think this is the only way to really transmit these meanings. This is a hard game to understand, not for its complexity, but for its theme. And the game knows this. It knows that it can't force you to fully understand its message. So it leads you with these small breadcrumbs of details, and only those who truly need to understand it will follow them long enough to unveil what's hiding under its surface. And I think that's more valuable than explaining it all in a dialogue box or a monologue. I truly think that this is how art should be. And speaking about art, we are yet to dive into what I think is the most interesting part of this game. Color and shapes are not the only thing that define this masterpiece, because the third and last tool Gris uses to tell you a story is sound. More specifically, music. If color and shape are the ones that carry different meanings, music is the thing that defines which one to feel. But what do I mean by that? If white is purity and cleanness, but also desolation and emptiness, how do I know which one the game is trying to make me feel? Well, a big part of that is music. Just compare this to this. You thought music is only the sounds being played? Music is as much silence as it is noise, and while sound is nice, silence is just as powerful. The decision of not using anything more than diegetic sounds in this part of the game is also a decision, and one that's directly commanded by what the developers are trying to make us understand: emptiness. But as much as music is nothing without silence, silence is also nothing without music. Before falling into the void, we are introduced to the main character of this game: singing. As the woman loses her voice, she loses everything, and to add to that feeling and rushed thoughts, a score in the background grows ever present, not only in volume, but in instruments. At first, a piano dominates with a set of strings filling in, but it's not long till another instrument takes the lead and starts this growth. The same melody our protagonist was singing is played, as if trying to hold on to it while the real one is no more. Horns start to substitute the strings, and we feel a crescendo of the song as an arpeggiating organ fades in, giving us a sense of dread. And now, when the tension is at its highest peak, instead of resolving, we are left alone, empty, in a world we no longer know. As we walk, some pianos fill the scene, a minimal composition really, slowly incorporating chords. What's interesting about this composition is that at first, only high notes are played. This conveys a sense of being floating, of not having where to stand. And after we find a little orb, our mission is made more clear, and the piano chords come in, grounding us with the lower notes, finally feeling like we can keep progressing. As the color red is added to our roster, violins are played, just as we were rebuilding our own score as we rebuild our own voice. But the instruments go beyond that. As we venture into the ruins of the red zone, we find ourselves in intermittent sandstorms, and these come accompanied by an organ. Again, its arpeggios create, mixed with the color red, a sense of imminent danger. But they also feel frenetic, out of place and out of pocket, as this instrument was not introduced earlier in the hand statue. This tells us more about its meaning, because how you introduce an instrument is also creating a feeling. It's not the same to slowly bring up the volume of an instrument than to play it harshly in the middle of what seemed to be a calm walk. This use of the instrument tells us the true meaning behind the color of danger, the rage and anger that our character is going through. It shapes the meaning of danger from the color red into something new that fits perfectly the narrative of this zone. As we get to the next area, we are welcomed by this sound. a very relaxed sound, much less harsh than the one of the organ, and the accompanying string section makes us feel calmed? Wait, doesn't this contradict the sole theme of the game? Well, as we already established, this part of the game represents bargaining, a state of negotiation. This stage is all about not losing control, not letting go of your conviction or routine. This is a representation of convincing yourself you can take that control back. The theme sounds contradicting in that place because it is. Because our protagonist is still holding on to her voice and is being lied by her emotions, telling her that she can negotiate it back, thinking as if this situation have just never happened. And this is exactly what the music is doing. It's telling us, the player, this is a nice and cozy game, pouring us right into the thoughts of the protagonist without us even noticing. But even with all of this, small moments of unfiltered emotion through dissonant notes and the return of the piano from previous stages, they can be heard throughout the entire area, reminding us this is happening. And even with that, this is not the most interesting thing that lives in this forest. But as I said, this part of the mechanics, you'll have to understand them by your own, because the next piece of music takes us deep into the darkest feelings of Gris. After being welcomed to the blue world by some percussion, nothing seems out of the ordinary. The same instruments we've been listening to fill what seems like a nice walk in the park, but as we venture into the underground, this music goes away, leaving us again alone. An old friend is brought back. The same piano and reverse piano we heard at the beginning is presented to us. And as we solve the puzzle, our friend for the zone appears, the bass. This instrument has a sound that helps grounding the vast majority of songs we hear because of its low end. You may not hear bass as much, but you feel it, and that's a job, and it's a job too here in this game. But if it's supposed to make us feel anchored and stable, how is this the defining instrument for depression? Well, for starters, this is not the only instrument we are introduced to in this stage. As for this is a rhythm instrument, it supports the rest of the score, which it's also helping us to get across the feeling of desolation too. But where the bass really helps us feel lost is exactly in its purpose of not making us feel that way. Let me explain. I hope you've never felt this, but if you've ever been depressed, you know it's not about feeling sad. It's about feeling nothing. Feeling you can't do any more to help, you can't go anywhere but where you are. And the bass tells us that by anchoring the music to the color, anchoring our life to the depression. We can't flow away from it, for it is holding us down with a thick, deep block of a string. But at the end of this section, something changes. As we complete its main puzzle, other instruments enter the scene, not in a minimalist composition as in the beginning, but complementing each other in harmony, giving a eureka moment for not only the puzzle, but the whole chapter. This is finding a way out, and is reaffirmed by the new instrument playing in the next statue. We have finally recovered our voice. The very thing we have lost at the beginning of the game came back to us. But we're still not there yet. We're not able to hold long notes, but we're off to a good start. And this is reflected in the next area as we use our newfound voice to solve the new puzzles. Here, the music comes and goes in harmony. Every instrument up until now is synchronized and used in the perfect dose alongside the others to create the most coherent and beautiful harmonized song until now. This is a very complex piece in comparison to the others, but even if it's more complex, it's beautiful, and its beauty comes from all the different stages and instruments we have gone through. Without them, we can't make a song, because it's not only about sound but silence, not about peace but emotion, not about the notes but the intention, and not about the instruments but their individual objectives. Because all of this emotion, all of these mixed feelings, they are what give character to the composition, to the piece, and to the whole experience. Combine that with a supporting meaningful color palette and with visuals that offer explanations without being intrusive, and you need no words to create a masterpiece of storytelling. A game that everyone can enjoy, but only the ones that go deep enough will truly understand. This is how Gris tells its story. There's a lot about Gris that I didn't cover in this video, like the ink monster, the characters, or the mechanics. So if you enjoyed this video, I highly encourage you to go play this game. After you like the video, of course, please. Gris is a piece of art that deserves to be experienced, and now that you understand its subtext better, I am sure you'll enjoy it a lot more. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.